Well, welcome everyone to the Conscious Good Creators Network event. So it's our Media Shaman Studio, and today we're actually going to talk about how consciousness is embedded in media, which is kind of the work we do. Mark is the leading expert in this field, I would say. And so you're in for a treat if you haven't really been exposed to this work. And some of you I know are in our classes, and some of you have been attending regularly, so it should be a lot of fun. And let me turn it over to Mark to kind of introduce us to this field. Take it away,
Yes.
Mark.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And so, what is how is consciousness embedded in media, and why? So, first thing is recognizing that everything we create, our consciousness that we're in when we're creating it, affects it, and it becomes embedded in it. And there's a lot of research in this area. And so basically that's it. But then how is it, and how can we tell it's there, what form it is, and how can we, if we're making media, how can we control what we're inputting with our consciousness? And so that's kind of the whole thing. But this work kind of came to me way back when I was in film school at the American Film Institute. And my mentor, Robert Weiss, who had been in the industry since the silent film period, basically told me that in his 40, 50 years in the entertainment industry in film, he observed that the language of the medium and the audience's capacity to understand it co-evolved. And that in the beginning, they had to show everything for the audience to follow. So if somebody had to go from their home to someone else's home, you had to show them walking out their door, walking down the stairs, getting in a car or a horse and buggy or whatever, and going there. And I mean, every step of the way. And but over time, the audience and the medium has become more and more capable of expressing in more abstract, non-linear forms and in deeper, more complex ways. But if you show a film made today or any media work made today to someone back then, they would not be able to comprehend it. And there's a co-evolution there. And that started me on this path. And so I've been doing research on it for many years and started to then apply developmental models to see if we could actually see the stages of development. And they were there not only in the media work themselves, but the mediums themselves evolved through those stages. So why don't we start the slideshow here, everybody. So here we go, how consciousness is embedded in media. So you want to start with this first slide, Jonathan, and I'll just get going? All right, so.
Sure. Well, we can talk a little about this. The main point here is that there's a constant co-evolution going on. People often discuss that the culture drives the audience, or that Hollywood drives the culture, or that Hollywood is just responding to what the audience wants. And actually, all of these are true and all simultaneously true, so that the media does evolve. And as the media evolves, the audience evolves from seeing the media. And then the audience goes back into the world and changes the culture in subtle ways because they've been changed by this media diet, and that in turn affects creators, and then creators then make more media that continues that cycle. So it's important to understand there's a constantly co-evolving dance. And so as an audience, you're in that, but also as a creator, you're aware that you're in this full cycle.
Yeah. And the direction can often shift here. What we've got here is from creator to media to audience to culture. Now, but something could, and this kind of flow is all there. But for example, if something happens in the culture, it will then affect both creator and the audience at the same time, and then start to be reflected in the media. So it's not, you know, it's not simple and linear. It's often, it'll bounce around. You know, the audience will affect this, the media will affect that, the culture, you know. So, but basically there's this co-evolutionary dance that's happening. And our technologies are often a little bit ahead of where the culture's at and helps to drive the culture forward. But then at times the culture could shift ahead too. So, but what we're seeing now is we're really kind of, our technologies are way ahead of the cultural field and even the social structures. So that's a lot of the reason why we have a lot of the problems that we have is our technologies are way ahead of our capacity to handle them. So we've got a very interesting process here, but so how do we then understand this in a deeper way and understand and read it? You know, like say, oh, the film I'm seeing is this or that, or the video game I'm playing or whatever. So next slide. So this co-evolutionary dance is happening in four main domains. Jonathan, do you want to run through them real quick? And then
Sure. And this is kind of, it's a little hard to grok at first, I know, to really get this, but it's very valuable when you're creating works and when you're evaluating works to see how conscious they are, how well thought out they are, that there are these four different domains of everyday experience. Everything can be put into these domains. So we have the individual domains, the interior and the exterior. And the interior is just what are your thoughts, your emotions, your self-awareness. But it could also be what's your primal wound and how that affects you inside in your head. And then that affects your actions and behaviors in the world, which is the individual exterior, but that's also the objects around you. And again, if you're doing a complex work, you could be looking at how what goes on inside your head affects what goes on immediately around you. It affects your behavior in the world. And then both of those are also ping-ponging constantly off of the collective domains, the collective interior and the collective exterior. And that collective interior, as you can see, is relationships, language, culture. It's all the things whenever two people meet, you have a field of that's more than one consciousness. You have a collective field. And those also are affected by everything that goes on. So if you're looking at drug policy, you know, you can look at how it affects individuals in their own head, how it affects them, their behavior, but then also how it affects their relationships and their culture. And then the collective exterior, which is known as the systems quadrant. And that's also how does the legal system interact with that? How do all these different systems, social systems and environments? And it's very valuable to break these down because if you're trying to make a complex work or if you're trying to evaluate if a work is complex, you try to see how thoroughly it looks at all of these. Because very often when people have clashes or when they're arguing about things, they're arguing because both sides are looking at a different one of these quadrants and none of them are looking at the whole thing. And of course, all four of these are co-evolving as well.
So here's an example of how this works in terms of the embedding of consciousness in our technologies and media especially is, let's give an example of the iPhone is a really easy one. So Steve Jobs, he's an individual and he's trying to bring it together a team to create this device. And this device, what they're doing is they're looking, if you listen to some of the videos of Steve Jobs talking, he basically was analyzing how to create this device using the 4 quadrants here. He was looking at what do the people need that they don't have? And what is that's the individual interior. And to create that, do we have the physical technology to create this thing that we're talking about? That's the individual exterior. Do we have the objective material functions, capacity? And then in the collective exterior, he wanted to analyze, do we have a kind of a system in place to produce this and to bring it to a mass market? And then also thinking about this need, and this need also includes how it's going to affect relationships, communication, and all that. So he was actually thinking of all that, and he was coming from what we call a meta-modern structure of consciousness, which is an integral structure, it's often called, and that device is an integral device. That consciousness became integrated into the device. So now when we use a smartphone like that, it's integrating forms and functions that were previously separate. We have a video recorder, we have a phone, we have a schedule book. All of these things that were separate are now integrated into a meaningful whole. So you could see how the consciousness of the creator affects what they're creating. And that's true of media as well. And as individuals and material realities and social systems and language and relationships and cultures co-evolve, each of those have different lines of development that we could track. And we could see those in media. And so that's how we could tell. So here's the key. So next slide, we're going to start to show you which lines you could track and look at a work. And so,
actually,
but before we do that,
I was going to mention also before that, another example of this, if you've all seen Citizen Kane, hopefully everyone's seen that, sort of this great classic Orson Welles film that's considered by many people to be the greatest film ever made, and it's certainly one of the greatest. But on that one, you can really see how each of these 4 quadrants plays out in there. You see his individual thoughts and emotions, or his inability to process his personal thoughts and emotions as part of the theme there. And his actions, we see how it affects his actions in the world. This primal wound he has that we learn about at the end of the film that kind of makes you understand him better, and how it affects his relationships and everything that goes on in his life. And then, of course, also the systems quadrant is well examined because he owns a newspaper and he runs for political office. So all of that system is being unpacked as well. And you really see how these interact with one another due to that primal wound. And when you find out at the end what his primal wound was, it actually gives you a whole new interpretation of each of these quadrants and why it affects him the way it did. So that's another example of how it can be embedded in a work.
Yeah, and that work was an evolutionary work too, because it was an integral meta-modern work, which we'll talk about. And that influenced, that helped the medium evolve as well. So that's the dance. But really, real quick before we move on, I'd like to give us a little experience of the 4 quadrants so we can get a more embodied understanding of it. So if everyone could get in a comfortable position. Now, this is what we call a perception practice. It's almost like meditation, but not. You could do it with eyes open or closed. And what it really is, meditation works on states of consciousness. How can you shift your state of consciousness? Perception practices work on our structure of consciousness, our actual perceptual field. Think of it as if consciousness is an ocean, think of the states as the waves, the tides, the weather patterns that are in constant movement and shifting all the time. Those are the states of our consciousness. And the shores and the bottom, that is the structure of the ocean. That creates the structure. And it's more stable, although it evolves over time, but much slower. So what we're working with is our structure of consciousness, making us aware of how we perceive the world. So eyes open or closed, because some people, they could visualize in their minds easier with their eyes open. So whichever way for you is easier for you to visualize. So I want you to all just, for a moment, focus on your breath, just observing it. And now bring your awareness to your thoughts. Try to observe your thoughts and your feelings. What are you feeling right now? This is your individual interior. And all of us here have a different experience going on right now inside of us. Now see if you could extend that awareness to include your body, feeling your body and feeling where your body is touching the ground and the chair you're in. Look around your room or your space where you are and look at the objects around you. That is your individual exterior, the objective physical reality of you right now. And we each have a different version of that space. And now, bring your awareness to the air around you, the light, there, and recognize there that the light, either natural light is coming from the atmosphere outside your space where you are, or the unnatural light, the human-made light, is coming off of an electrical system, so, and also that right now we're communicating across the planet with this technology, the internet. And if your eyes are closed, open your eyes and look at the screen, and you could see on the side, that there's several people here, and recognize that we're in a collective, there's a collective interior here. There's a field that we have a relationship going on. I'm talking to you and you're hearing it. So there's language going on and we're all relating to each other. We're all in this collective field. So in this moment, these four quadrants are operating. In every moment. And inside of us, we evolve. When we go back to when we were born and kind of just kind of feel into that when we were born, we didn't have language. So every thought we're having, we didn't have any of that. When we looked out at the world, there was no separation of self and other, and we've evolved through stages and we've developed. The same is true, our bodies evolve physically, we grow and stuff like that. Societies evolve and grow, different streams, and cultures and relationships evolve and grow. And these all kind of co-evolve together. And so we could see this in our lives, we could see this in art, in media. It's all there. And where those evolutionary markers are in each of the quadrants can tell us the structure of consciousness that was used to create the work. So shall we move on to start to look at these lines of development? And we're going to start in culture. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Sure. These are the cultural codes. Well, these are kind of, when you look at the evolution of humans and cultures and societies, you could obviously break it up through as many different partitions as you want. It's like, how many degrees are there between freezing and boiling? Well, it's 100 or it's 220, or it depends what you use. But these are kind of a very rough one. You have the modern world is what we think of as the industrial world. And so everything before that we're putting in the class of pre-modern, but that includes everything from the most primitive hunter-gatherer societies to tribal societies, and then all the way through things like feudalism, which is a more organized society, which we wouldn't think of as modern, although it has some science and some technology in it. It's more hierarchical than some of the pre-modern societies. But we did have this evolution, and that our consciousness and our structure of consciousness evolved as we moved up that ladder from those to the modern world. And the modern world is where we started to look at things like objective truth, science, technology, rational thought. So all of the religions, the great religions, lost some of their grip when modernity came in, because you had to balance your belief in God and your belief in an ultimate authority, an authoritarian truth, with whatever science told us. So that's what we think of as the modern world. And we thought, oh, rational, objective truth. And when we got to the Industrial Revolution, scientists started to think, well, now we finally figured out how to perfect humans. We'll just learn more and more about the world, and we'll get more and more perfect, and our understanding will get more perfect. But then at a certain point, really in the 1960s, where it really took off, was the postmodern worldview, which started to deconstruct the modern worldview and said that objective truth is one thing, but not everything that we think of as objective is objective. There's a lot of, settler colonialism is embedded into science, and who gets funded has a lot of different things that can warp that field, and white supremacy and male supremacy, and all these things began to deconstruct, which was a very important step that postmodernism took. But then at a certain point, you say, well, wait a minute, if you deconstruct everything, what's the ground that you stand on? Is there a way to put objective truth in its proper place, but also be able to deconstruct things and see which things are objective and which things aren't, to see qualified truth? And that's sort of what the meta-modern perspective is that we're talking about. And the more advanced media works are very good at sorting through the different layers of truth and figuring out which ones go where. And I'm sure Mark can say more about that. And then transmodern, after that, you can really, I'll leave you to unpack that one. But basically, societies and individuals and cultures go through these stages, and we are going through these stages. And the important thing to note is that each stage transcends and includes the previous stages, so that there are some pre-modern values that we still live with that are very valuable, that emerged in the pre-modern, like duty and loyalty and honor, societies, and family values. Those all emerged in the pre-modern tribal when they were survival values. And now they're still important. And a lot of times we lose those values because we're not like those more primitive people, but sometimes we need to integrate them into a whole.
Well, but basically, this is not a hierarchy. This is what we call a holarchy. These are wholes that are parts of other wholes, and we transcend and include, like Jonathan was saying. So it's kind of like we would never say that an atom is less valuable than a molecule, but an atom, um, a molecule is made up of atoms, and the cell is made up of molecules. And there's kind of an increase in complexity, but they all still coexist. So in us, as we evolve through stages of development in childhood, or different stages and cultures evolve and all of that is still inside of us. And so the cultural codes are reflected in kind of both individuals and in our cultures. So in art, especially, we could see, the difference between modern and postmodern art. Modern. Now, when we say, it's interesting that most of the art in museums of modern art are actually postmodern art. Modern art is what emerged in the Enlightenment, and in modern art is when we discovered how to create realism, realistic art. Three-dimensional perspective was the main shift into modern art. So really, surrealism, deconstructionism, Dadaism, all of that is postmodern art. So, and pre-modern includes everything from cave paintings to, spiritual frescoes in the churches of, of Europe. So, but then when the shift to modern art, when Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci started to really, and all the others started to really kind of be able to capture reality and take it even farther. That was the birth of modern art. So we could see that there's many indications of these forms in art, especially in moving image. And we're going to unpack those for you coming up. But meta modern is the first one that sees all the others and recognizes their value and starts to create an integrated big picture. So in works that are meta modern or integral, is another way we call them, you'll see an integration of multiple cultural code worldviews and fitting them together into a whole. The transmodern is more the spiritual and transcendent dimensions. So get more ethereal and transcendental art is up in there.
And I was going to say, in the art world, the term meta modern kind of first emerged in the art world to describe a kind of art that had, in some cases, you'll see what's called ironic sincerity or sincere irony. So that when you look at the show like The Simpsons, that's a pure postmodern show because it's deconstructive, it's irreverent, it's very seldom does it take itself seriously, even though it deals with serious themes, but it doesn't behave in a serious way. Whereas a lot of shows now, you'll find extreme irreverence tied with extremely deeply felt truths and emotions and characters evolving and going through pain while also being extremely irreverent. So you'll see that in a more meta modern show. And we're seeing a lot of that in the culture now. shows that are deeply felt. So they're not just, we're above it all, we're just looking at it all and deconstructing all of it, and nothing is serious and nothing matters, which is sort of more where The Simpsons comes from compared to, say, I don't know, BoJack Horseman, if you've ever seen that show. And there's a lot of other shows and movies now which do that.
So let's go to the next slide. This one we can really, this one's easy to see in media. Jonathan, you want to introduce this one?
Yeah, the circle of care and concern, which is how broad your circle is of who you connect with and who you think that you're a part of. And in the sort of more, the earlier stages, you have everything from egocentric, which is just myself, I only care about myself, all the way to ethnocentric, which is just my tribe or my group. So, and that was a survival strategy, that kind of circle of care and concern. If you were in a tribe, you had to be loyal to your tribe and you had to be suspicious of other tribes. So that was a natural emergence of that structure. But then as we moved into sociocentric, my country, or even in feudalism, you had kingdoms, and then you moved to nation states in these different structures, your circle actually expands of who you include in your circle. So it's not just your family or just the people who are like you, but it's the people who are in your, how you define your tribe, which could be a nation state now, and it can be all the people in that nation state. And then that keeps expanding outwards to cosmocentric, which is sort of all life in the universe. And that's the pluralistic structure where you feel I'm connected to everything.
No, I'm sorry.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. World centric is all of humanity. Take it away.
Yeah, no. So all right, so we go from egocentric, me, to my tribe, to my culture, my religion, to my country, my nation, to all of humanity and the planet, which is world centric, to all sentient life in the universe, which is the cosmocentric, which is connected to the meta-modern. And then there's the transcentric, which is the idea of the circle of care and concern that I am separate from what I care about, is transcended. And so I am it. And so that's the transcentric. Now in films, in media, it's really easy to see this in a character. So in a film like Groundhog Day, where the main character is stuck in the same day over and over again, basically until he evolves from egocentric to cosmocentric. And we can watch that really beautifully in that film. So, and there's a lot of films that play with this. And you can see the character development. Now, there's a difference between what we call vertical and horizontal development. Vertical development is shifting from stage to stage, like we're doing here, from egocentric to ethnocentric to caring about others, to sociocentric to caring about my whole community, and then all that. That's vertical. But a lot of films that are not operating at the meta-modern integral level will have development that's horizontal, that's within a stage. Now, what that is, for example, a love story. A lot of love stories operate this way, that one of the characters or both have been hurt before. So they have a wound that's preventing them from loving others, getting close to others. And the story is about how they heal that. That's horizontal development. But they're staying still in the same ocean, the same structure. They just have a wound that's stopping them from fully living in that structure. And that is, So if you're looking at a media work and, you know, a character, you know, their circle of care and concern is obviously, you know, that they're very nationalistic, let's say, you know, my country and all that. Um, you could tell, okay, that they're at the sociocentric. And if they stay there for the whole film, you could pretty much say that that's the sociocentric character. You know? And if the film itself can be that way. So when you're watching a film or a media work and the arc of the media work, um, it's looking at this story, and the story is talking about all of humanity. It's a story about all of humanity. Well, it's obviously world centric. So let's go to the next slide. And we're going to have time for everyone to ask questions. We just wanted to give you the big picture here. So the next one is this is in the systems quadrant. This is in the collective exterior, where we see this in our societies and around us, and in the social environments of the media works themselves.
We should mention that this previous one, the circle of care and concern, is in the upper left, which is the individual interior quadrant. So it's
Yes.
how you perceive the world inside of your head. It will affect how you behave, and it will, obviously, you're interacting with culture and society, but this is your own personal code inside of your head. Whereas this one, as Mark said, is the lower right, which is the systems quadrant, the social techno-economic development. And that, again, you can see it reflected in the lower stages for hunter-gatherer to the agricultural stage. And then you go to the industrial system of techno-economic development, which what we think of as the modern world, although it's really the modern world now, is the informational pluralistic, which is more about information and interactions in that way. And then we go up to the convergent and the virtual. I'll let Mark unpack those for you, but I will say you can see these in films too. The example we like to use is a movie like Avatar, which has tribal people in it who are sort of the heroes in this case, and then you also have the industrial structure. That structure is represented by the mythic structure by the military, which is very hierarchical and very obedient.
Okay, I got definitely a little off there.
Yeah.
The military is representative of the traditional, which is still part of the pre-modern. That's the mythic, the industrial is the businessman.
I got thrown off by the orange because there's an orange usually. All right, well, we can discuss that later. Isn't orange usually the mythic?
No.
No?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. Orange is always the rational industrial.
Oh, yes. Yeah. All right, never mind.
All those drugs, man.
All the witches.
So, I mean, it's so basically in Avatar, you've got the tribal, which, and then we've got, it's obviously the tribe. We've got the military, which represents the traditional feudal kind of consciousness, and feudal system, that kind of honor and duty and, us versus them mentality is part of that. And then you have the businessman, whose only concern is, the product, that they're going to get the resources and all that. Then you have the informational that's connected to the postmodern pluralistic, and you get that in the social scientist character, she's trying to understand all the different cultures and bring everybody together. That's that. And the convergence, the meta modern, is actually that moment when the main character evolves from the military consciousness, and he becomes one at the end with the tribal spirit of the tree, and he transcends and he converges with that consciousness. the collective consciousness of the planet. So that's a modern or convergent zone. Now, in the techno-economic zone, that's not represented in the film, but a techno-economic representation, convergent technology, is the smartphone. That's an integral meta-modern technology, which it converges previously separate things into a meaningful whole. And so that informational is the internet. So that's very pluralistic. You got a lot of different information all at once, and you can pick and choose and all that. But convergent is, there's a integrating force that's part of that. So in a film and a media work, if it's pluralistic, postmodern, and let's say it's representing a postmodern character, who is a postmodern character is usually one that's very, it's almost like informational, the internet, that pluralism of ideas is part of that. So you have that connection to the social thing as well. You could represent that in the social environments. Now, here's a good one. Black Panther. Black Panther, the city in Wakanda is convergent. So the social environment in Black Panther in Wakanda is meta-modern. So you've got an architecture that integrates tribal, industrial, informational, all and into meaningful whole. So there's a great example of representing in a film convergent techno-economic development. Virtual, one thought, would be if you're a Star Trek fan, and the holodeck is a representation of a virtual environment, so that if you get into that, if you're in a virtual world, or now with virtual reality, augmented reality, all of those are virtual technologies. So you could see how our technology is way up there. It's going way up there, and a lot of our social systems are still at industrial, while our global economic system is at informational. But the actual structures in our nations, our government systems are industrial still. So you've got a major kind of shift here, problem here. I see a question. Is it a quick understanding question or the deep question, Henrik? Can we wait?
Yes, that's the
Because we're
question.
just, go ahead.
It's on the Black Panther thing, and because I was wondering about the material is from this meteorite. I can't pronounce it in English suddenly, but it has this like spiritual component to it as well.
Mhm.
So, and the technology in Wakanda is built on that energy and also the spiritual component, and
Correct.
that is more, I don't know, that I don't see that component relevant in like Star Trek or things like that. And I'm also like wondering about there's this Russian scientist who was expanding on technologies like when humanity can terraform and when humanity can uh, harness stars and galaxies and so on. That is evolution of technology when in a much more
So what's the
expansive.
question here?
I'm just wondering um, if you would like to comment on the spiritual component in the Wakanda technology versus like the Star Trek thing here, and how they're hierarchically placed.
We'll get to that later on when we unpack
All
it
right,
more.
alrighty.
Okay. Next slide. Here we go. Okay. So now we're going to go through a very simple map. So how can we see these different structures of consciousness in the stories, in the images, and in the sounds, and in the characters? You know, the characters, the story patterns, all of that. And what we've done is we've broken down. So on the far left-hand side of your screen, we've got the cultural code, the transmodern, metamodern, postmodern, modern, and pre-modern. Then next column, we break that down into a more graduated scale, where we go from archaic, which is, that moment, that primal moment of birth, when we're born, or birth of humanity, or when we get caught in pure survival mode. And we go all the way up to the transpersonal. So so when we're looking at works, we could then use this scale to go through. All right, so the text is the story. So in the next three columns, we've broken down three elements when we're looking at a story that you could perceive each of these structures and look at the difference. So each of those structures, from archaic, magic, egoic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, integral, super integral, and transpersonal, you see in that same column, they're related to survival-centric, pre-egocentric, egocentric, ethnocentric, sociocentric, global-centric, ecocentric, cosmocentric, transcentric. So we've got the circles of care and concern as part of that. So those are our baselines that we're working on, okay? So then how does each of those show up in a story? First thing is, what is the information modality that's being used? When you're at the archaic, when you're representing archaic or survival centric, you get a sign and symbol kind of thing. Think of the cave paintings, very, archaic is very kind of fundamental information, I'm hungry. The sun is shining, it's night. It's very simple, communication modality and information sharing, like when we get to the magical, which is start to get the forming of tribal and all that, we get more into storytelling that's aphorisms, fables, folktale kind of stuff, right? So those are, sitting around the fire. And once we get the language going and a shared communication field, we start communicating in that form, and we can see that in media work. using that. The egocentric is when tribal societies become centralized towards a, a individual authority, warrior tribes, and stuff like that. And then the communication of the storytelling is more analogy and parable form. The mythic is ethnocentric, it's feudal, all of that. And you get history. So we start talking about historical storytelling. Myth and legend comes into play here. So we could all see that in many media works, integrated in many media works. The sociocentric or the rational stage, the modern stage. Obviously, the information modality is facts and figures. So if we watch a film about Sherlock Holmes, it's about facts and figures, right? Or, the police shows that, or the lawyer shows just the facts, Anyways, so then when we get up to pluralistic, postmodern, which is the global centric circle of care and concern, it's more about experiences. We share experiences and we share opinions. We share our subjective information fields. And, you can see it in a film like Annie Hall. There's this great segment where each of them are in a therapy office and separately, and they're asked the same question. And they even give the same answer, but their spin on it is totally subjective and opposite. So, so then when we get up to the integral, the information modality mode is more sharing perspectives, sharing maps, big picture maps of things, trying to give you a perspective, a different perspective. And then, as we get into the super integral, then we get really big picture overviews, and then in the transpersonal, transmodern, the main mode of storytelling is a unitive awareness kind of experience where you're not giving these bits of information, but you're communicating a field of awareness, a unitive field. So that's kind of a basic thing. And then every story and every character really has a truth value. There's a causality value, like what is the type of truth and causality pattern that they value. So obviously modern rational, objective truth and cause and effect, right? So if a media work is all about cause and effect and objective truth is primary, you can pretty much be sure it's a modern story, anchored in the modern, anchored in the rational. Whereas postmodern is about relative truth, my truth and your truth is equal. And the causality pattern, one interesting postmodern model, causality pattern is synchronicity. So if we go back down to the pre-modern and mythic, absolute truth is what they value, what is valued at this stage. This is what my God has communicated. This is the truth. Everything else is not. Absolute truth. And often this is connected to fate. as a causality pattern. It's your fate that is determined by the gods. Okay. And we could go down into, other domains like subjective truth, in terms of when you get into the egocentric, the leader's truth is what the truth is, and everything is about the free will of that leader and all that. So we could look at all these, and you could look at them some more, but you could see how both the truth and causality values are integrated into a story, into a character. A Sherlock Holmes, his thing is objective truth and cause and effect. That's where his anchor is. Woody Allen's characters is all about relative truth, So that's so you can really kind of see these in media works. Now, as we go through these, feel free to ask questions for clarity. And then once we go through them all, then we'll open it up for everything. And you could raise your hand. There's like a thing to raise your hand. Reactions, I think it's called. So then also, stories and events have what Robert McKee calls value polarity patterns. So basically, for example, the mythic structure, the pre-modern mythic or traditional structure, which believes in the absolute truth, their value polarity pattern is right and wrong, black and white, us and them. That's the value polarity pattern of that type of story, or embedded in that type of character. They're operating that way with that kind of polarity. Where it's you have an egocentric character, it's about what I want or what I don't want. That's that kind of polarity pattern for that kind of character. In the rational, it's what is real and what's not real, right? What's objectively real and what's not real. That's that polarity pattern of both characters and stories. When you get to the postmodern, it's aware or unaware. Are you woke or are you not woke? It's, are you conscious or you're not conscious? In the integral, it's really about the polarity is between greater and lesser perspectival depth and span. So is it more or less complex? Is it, and is it a whole part or part whole? The polarity is more complex, but it's, is this a whole that's part of something else? Is that what we're focusing on? Or if it's a part that is is a whole? It gets more complex, but it is a polarity. And just if you think about that, it's looking at the different stages of development and which stage has a higher or lower, or which stage has a deeper or less deep, more expansive or less expansive perceptual field.
Can use the
Those are
example
polarity
of
patterns.
we can use the example of the Matrix there, when he wakes up and
Yes,
sees that he's inside the Matrix and suddenly has a completely different understanding of reality in that moment. And the audience does as well. So that's an example of seeing a greater or lesser perspectival depth and span.
bingo. That's a great example of that. That's a meta-modern integral moment of a value, a story value polarity shift that we feel very powerfully. And in the transmodern, transpersonal, it's beingness or non-beingness. So it's not, it's, are you there or you're not there yet? You know, it's like, you know, are you bodhisattva yet? You know, have you crossed over the line or not yet? So, you know, so those are kind of three examples of basic ways that these different structures can be embedded in media. And we could do it as a creator, we could work with it consciously. As a consumer, we could become more aware of the type of consciousness that we're watching, that's being communicated to us through the work. Now, these are also represented visually. So that's the next column. And this, a really easy example is if the work is using visual realism, then you know that is connected to the modern and rational, right? So it's realism. Where if it's using iconic and archetypal visual storytelling, visual expression, that's pre-modern and mythic, and traditional kind of resonance there. And the postmodern visually can be represented with abstract, deconstructed, multiple styles, multiple subjective views of something. And for the meta-modern, it's an integration of multiple perceptual fields. So a great example is Inception. I don't know if everyone has seen this work, but the characters have a technology that allows them to go into someone else's dream state. But the dream state has multiple levels that you can sink into. And those levels are related to all of these structures. And there's a moment at the end when visually the characters and the action moves across all levels of the dream. It's climaxing through all of them visually. And the audience is following. And it integrates it into a waking up across. There's like a shift that moves through all of them. And that is a integral meta-modern visual expression field. The transcendental style, which is the transmodern, transpersonal, we could see that in works like Tree of Life. There's this moment where they open the door and walk out into this vast space, and there's a light, and there's like this slow movement, and it's just, or there's one shot where the woman is floating and kind of dancing in the space around a tree with ethereal music. That's a transcendental visual field. So you could see how the different structures, different stages can be represented visually. And then the final column is sound-wise with music and auditory expression, which we've already started to touch on. But, you know, also musically, it's really easy, you know, modern has modern music or pop music, the pre-modern mythic, traditional, there's the classical music. Of course, there's indigenous music that's connected to the tribal. Postmodern you know, has a lot of, there's abstract postmodern music, neoclassical, like the work of Philip Glass. I don't know if people are familiar with his work. Um, then at the integral modern, you get hybrid fusion work, where you're fusing together the different kind of structures, the different types of music, but fusion into a meaningful whole.
In fact, Black Panther does that. If you listen to the soundtrack on Black Panther, they're mixing tribal beats with modern Afro pop, with really sort of postmodern electronic music, and even integral music. So,
Right. Or if you listen to a group or it's a Enigma, they kind of do that as well musically. And then when we start to get into the super integral transpersonal, you start to get more atmospheric, celestial, sacred, transformational kind of music and sounds. So you could see how music and image and story all reflect these patterns, different patterns of consciousness. And when we're looking at a work, when we're watching it and when we're creating it, these patterns are being communicated. So we could say that the creator consciousness is embedded in the media work, which becomes media consciousness, that media has the consciousness. It's been embedded, but every time it's played, it lives again. And we're watching it. When we're watching it, it goes into us. As Edgar Morin, the French sociologist and complex thought pioneer, said, the moving image is processed by the brain the same way that it processes our own inner visualizations and dreams. So it takes this in pretty directly as a dream that we're dreaming. And it mixes with our consciousness and affects our consciousness. So understanding this, especially now with media being so much part of our lives, is important. So in a way, it's like, what type of media food do you want to consume? You know. So, do you have any final thoughts, Jonathan, before we open it up?
and nope, I think we've kind of covered it a bit. I mean, these are obviously
Yeah.
very complex, but mainly if you just look for those structures of consciousness and the four quadrants, that's a good place to start.
And if
Because
you could look at this thing, we're going to put these images, these slides for you in um, our what do you call that? Our stream in the Conscious Good Creators Network, in our Media Shaman Studio stream for you to download.
and this video will be posted at the Integral Cinema Project YouTube.
All right, so let's open it up to questions, reflections. And if you're muted, unmute yourself.
I don't know if you want to tackle Henrik's question about Wakanda and the vibranium as a kind of magic technology versus Star Trek, which doesn't really use magic technology, although in a way they sort of do too, but they don't
Yeah,
call it that.
yeah. Okay, well, yes, the Black Panther starts with a archaic and primal kind of and mythic kind of foundation. That's the spiritual technology that is part of its evolutionary arc. And it's the driving force of their societal evolution. So that's part of it. So it is this, it's integrating all of those things. And in a way that substance is a beautiful integration of the pre-modern and modern. So it's this pre-modern mythic sacred force that fuels their modern technological advances and even beyond that. So that's kind of a fundamental. But when you look at Star Trek, imagine Wakanda is one of the worlds in Star Trek. And there's been some episodes where, you know, they go to worlds where they have sacred, you know, stuff and all that. But Star Trek is operating from a different meta-modern angle. They're coming from, the prime directive is a meta-modern paradigm that they recognize that every society evolves at their own pace, and to honor and recognize all stages of development. So the narrative field, the meta-modern narrative field, the big picture frame of Star Trek is that primal directive. Whereas the meta-modern anchor of Black Panther is this mythic story, creation story, and substance, is the ground and the anchor and the catalyst. Whereas Star Trek is using, so when you have a big picture, the big picture can be coming from a different angle at something, depending on where the story is rooted. So Star Trek, the root is the prime directive. Whereas here, the root is this creation event and the substance that became the foundation and the driving force of their evolution in their society. So you've got a different integration field at work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
But they're both meta-modern. They're both integral.
Yeah.
Can you feel that?
Yeah, totally.
Anybody else?
I'll also say welcome to Kelly, who showed up a little bit late, and to Trina, who's shown up from the Conscious Good Creators Network. Welcome, Trina.
Hi, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was looking forward to this, and I'm sorry I jumped in at the tail end, but eager for the replay.
It's great to see you.
Good to see all your faces. The beer's looking good, Mark.
Hello.
Hey, Michael.
Kelly.
Good to see you.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Kelly.
Hello, everybody. Sorry for arriving late. I was listening to everything. Thank you.
Awesome. So we had a question about other meta-modern works, and I did mention the integral movie and TV list, which we have up on the IMDb, which is in the chat now, thanks to Vic. So you can certainly check that out. There are a lot of other films there that Mark has evaluated and found to be operating at this sort of higher structures and trying to unpack these different levels. Just going to recommend also.
Jonathan, can you post that in the Creators Network too, that link?
Yeah, we could do that.
You've done that? Okay, cool. Thanks.
We will.
Yep. I was going to suggest other works. We're constantly finding new works, but Messiah on Netflix was a show which was sort of about what would happen if a Christ-like, Messiah-like figure showed up in the modern world. And that one, even the very first episode, you can see 5 different structures of consciousness represented. You can see people who are magic mythic, who first greet him, who think he's done a miracle, so they think he's a miracle worker and they follow him. And then you see there are characters who are operating in the us versus them mythic level, like there's an Israeli Secret Service guy who doesn't trust him. And then there's a CIA operative who's operating at the rational level, but is also doesn't trust him. So each of them is perceiving him through their lens, and you're seeing it unpacked, and you have all these different characters at different levels.
And we have a hand up from Kelly.
Yes, thank you. I actually had a question that's I was wondering if we could I would like to just kind of explore very generally the idea of applying these frameworks to more interactive media, like for example social media or some of the new forms of media creation we're seeing nowadays. Just any thoughts, I'd be really grateful.
Sure. Well, with interactivity, that brings in another column in that map, expression field. So in terms of, and it actually, how we interact with a story opens it up in a way that it becomes more of a body communication. So we're opening up. So if we're using text, image, and sound, and the unfolding of all of that in time, and we add interactivity. So if you have a virtual media work, or you have a social media work where you go to a website and you have images, you have text there and images, and with those images, there was probably sound with those images. But then you want to think about when you were designing social media, or when we're actually interacting with it, there's a process of time going on. But we have to, the interactivity is connected with time, and we're making those choices of where to focus. So we are co-creating it in a way, in terms of our experience. So there's websites, there's websites where you could create a website where you can get a sense of being able to dive deep, but also to see the big picture, right? So those websites are more meta-modern because you get a set, they're representing this polarity between around variations in the depth and expansiveness of the perceptual field. So if you give someone the interactive choice to be able to move into focused, but then see the bigger picture when they want to, you're creating an integral meta-modern experience. So the same, so if you look at especially the story value polarity patterns, the story becomes our interactivity. We're moving through it, and it's like, so right now, you asked me a question. I'm answering the question. That's a story. That's the story of this moment. If I'm going to a website and I'm clicking on this, I'm going here, I'm learning this, I could communicate that with someone as a story, because my mind is going, yeah, I went there, which was the beginning. I looked around, I went over here, I learned this, I did that. So that's the storytelling. So we are then the website or the social media site or the virtual space that's interactive has multiple choices that we can create. Now, some video games operate only at the mythic, right? You're going to kill somebody or be killed. And so you're interacting just with that field. But other video games can have vertical shifts that you have to, when you're in one level, you operating at that structure of consciousness and you win, but the next level might be the different structure of consciousness that you have to figure out how to win. So it's like, if it starts mythic with warrior mode and you have to fight your way to win at that level, what if the next level is rational? That the only way you win and move forward and graduate is if you figure out a thought problem. So suddenly you're shifting your interactive expression mode into a different structure of consciousness. Does that make sense? And you can even play with, that type of thing. So all of these work for interactive as well, but it's much more dynamic and embodied. And it's also it's both inside of all of those streams, and it's its own line of expression where there's a fundamental simple expression of clicking on the link to something versus I have a bodysuit on, I'm in a virtual space and I'm on another planet, and every move of my body, is being represented in my virtual field. There's an evolution there. And so you go from that archaic, that click on the mouse, that click on the link is fundamental archaic, right? Whereas when you're in the pure 100% virtual field, where you're transcending the line between physical reality and virtual reality, then you're in a modern form of interactivity. Does that answer?
Yes. This is a very open question. So.
Yeah. And we're just at the cutting edge of all this, who knows what's about to emerge as well. So, in that field of interactive, immersive technology.
We're in the very early stages, I think. But that does bring us almost to the end of our hour and a half. And I want to thank everybody who came to this event, participated, and hopefully it'll get you thinking a bit more about when you analyze media, about how complex it is and how sophisticated it is. And if you're making media, or even, as Kelly said, posting on social media, you can be thinking about how to reach different audiences, kind of crossover. Anybody have any final questions or comments?
Many thanks, Jonathan and Mark. I learned a lot, but I need to go to one class right now. It was a great opportunity to know you.
Thank you.
I hope we will have another opportunity.
We do these every month. We do a Media Shaman Studio. We also do teach classes at mediashaman.org. You can find those. We have a number of our
Okay.
students on this call right now, actually. And,
Okay,
so
I'll
we
be there
invite
the
people
next
to
month.
it.
Bye.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You want to sign us off, Mark?
Thank
Welcome.
you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. And stay safe, stay well, stay awake.